Okay.
I think we have one new person that I just connected with this morning that's on. So I don't know if you want to, Carol, introduce yourself again, because some people might not know you from last time.
Barbara, you're going to start it or tell me when to go.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Hi, I'm Barbara. I'm with Lutheran Child and Family Services. Some of you have saw me last week when we connected here. And this is session 2 of 3, but you don't have to be here for session 1 to still benefit from sessions 2 and 3. So if you're new to this session, welcome. And I'd like to introduce Carol Applegate. And she's going to tell a little bit about herself. And she's with Applegate Dillman Elder Law. And we've been fortunate to have her provide some programming opportunities for LCFS clients. And we're really happy to have this today for you guys to learn more about downsizing and long-term care options. So Carol, do you want to just share?
Yes. Okay. It's not going forward. So I'm Carol Applegate from Applegate and Dillman, and I know a lot of you from previous presentations, but I also want to welcome today Laura Roman, who is from Westminster. She's going to be helping with this a little bit and talk about CCRCs and continuing care facilities. Today, I get the privilege of talking about cost of care facilities, and I find that my clients really do not have an understanding of what should they look for if they've got some options for long-term care. So I'm going. So when do I really make a different decision? When do I say, okay, the time has come that I've got to make some different living arrangements? So there's 2 times. We either wait until we're in a crisis, or we have done some pre-planning. And I have to tell you from my own personal experience is that I'm sort of approaching that age where I have to make a decision as to, do I really need my house? Do I need all of this stuff? And it's a very emotional time. It is very emotional because when, the thing that keeps me from moving forward is I go home and I say, well, I have all this stuff. And when I go to say, okay, I'll start taking it to Goodwill or get rid of it, it's every little piece that I pick up has sort of an emotional attachment to it. I say, oh, I can't get rid of that because, my grandson gave me that 16 years ago and I gotta hang on to it. So it's when we begin to deal with these decisions and so forth, it can be very emotional. So what we tend to do is put it off until we have a crisis. And I just got a call this morning, just a few minutes ago, where, mom fell, ended up in the hospital. Now we're in a crisis situation. So crisis is not the best time to do this kind of thing. And it's best not that we not wait until we have a crisis, but that we begin thinking about that pre-planning and how do I do this and what are my options? The things to consider, and I mentioned these last week, is what is my health situation? I'm in really good health right now, but I can tell my whole body is changing. And so, there's things, our health situation really makes it, brings this all to the surface when we have to really deal with what is my health? What do I expect my health to be? You can be healthy your entire life and all of a sudden have a stroke or get a diagnosis that you don't like. So look at your health situation. What are your finances? As we get to this age and we begin to think about how much money do we have? What can I afford to pay for? What should I sell to get so that I have enough finances? And we look at our finances in a different manner. It's from how much do I have now? And is that going to last until the end of my life? And that's, I just bought a new car about a year ago, and I'm thinking that may be the last car that I really buy, so you begin to look at things a lot differently, and your finances become much more important. And then the cost of care, and I'm going to go through some of that today and give you an idea of really what is the cost of care. And then finally, how am I going to pay for that? So what are really my options for downsizing and for making this decision? Okay. There's a lot of options that we have. We can look at our own home. Most of us, hopefully at this point, although I'm seeing this more and more, that we really, when we retire, we don't have our house paid for because finances and, jobs and so forth have been so different. But, is it best that I live in my own home and maybe I just need to make some modifications? I have a walk-in shower at my house, but do I put bars on there? What do I need to do? But I have 2 or 3 steps to go out to my garage. Should I make those some modifications and just stay in my own home? Should I downsize to a smaller home? Well, in this market today, downsizing to a smaller home is just as expensive sometimes as keeping what you have. So you have to look at that. Is it really worth me downsizing to a smaller home? Living with friends or in a communal living. We're seeing more and more people say, well, maybe 2 or 3 of us could live together and share one home. But that's not for everyone. If you're like me and you've been alone for a long time, you like your privacy. There are apartments, and apartments in our area are going up almost every minute. But there again, the cost of those apartments are expensive. We look at some condominiums, and I have to tell you, I've looked at all of these things. And we are also seeing, these 55 and older communities where they're really gearing either condominiums or apartments to those of us that are aging. I'm also seeing, and here in Carmel especially, mother-in-law quarters. So you might have a big house for yourself, but in the back, they've put up a little bit apartment, and they're actually doing some changes in the zoning here in Carmel to accommodate mother-in-law quarters, smaller houses back behind. So you're close to your family members, but they've got their privacy and you have your privacy. We're seeing some of these, what we call granny pods or tiny houses going up. I happen to have a place in North Carolina, and they are selling these little tiny, they're called tiny homes. And they're just 1 or 2, they just can set them into a small little place, and they have a little porch, they have a little kitchen, they have a little bathroom, and they're just nice, but they're called little tiny homes. So those are awesome options that you might want to consider. Now we're going to really get to the nitty gritty of this, and that is the cost of this care. So what does it cost? Well, if, a lot of places have these levels of care. And I think, Laura, you'll be talking a little bit about your facility and how there's different levels of care, so that they start out with independent living. And so you're very independent. You have your own apartment, you have your own car, you have, maybe an activity fee, or you're paying some extra cost for some of the advantages that you have in this independent. But you are it's like you have your own home. And so those monthly costs, can vary according to the facility and to the place that you're choosing. Then the next option would be, let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to stay in my home, but I just need some assistance here, especially if you've got a husband and wife. And maybe the wife has some problems and cannot really do the cooking and the cleaning and all of that. So you say, okay, let's just get some in-home care. And the average hourly rate in Indiana right now is about $22.73 to $28 an hour. Okay, so you sort of say, okay, you look around at in-home care for businesses who provide that kind of care. and you get their cost and you multiply that times the number of hours that you need them. We're finding that if you need round the clock 24-hour in-home care, it is probably a little, at least equal to a skilled care facility or more than a skilled care facility. So there comes a time where you say, well, I need this number of hours, but it's costing me so much money. Maybe I would be better off going into a facility. So you can spend for in-home care anywhere from $48,000 to $50,000 per year for in-home care. Assisted living is the next level of care. So I'm sort of taking these from where you need little care to more and more and more care. So assisted living is basically a facility where you have your own apartment. You have, most of the assisted living facilities have their own kitchen and their own bathroom. Many of those apartments are now having their own washer and dryer in them. So this assisted living, but they're within a facility, okay? So that if you need someone, or if you need to go down for your meals, or if you're sick, you have nursing care there that is available to you. And usually in assisted living, you could have your own car, you can come and go as you want. But it was really nice. My mom was in an assisted living, and I knew that if my mom was sick or she missed a meal or she fell, that someone was going to be checking on her on a daily basis, and I knew she was safe there. So assisted living is you're very independent, but you still have some care there. Assisted living can vary, and it goes anywhere from about $4,000 a month to $5,000 or $6,000. And most of our assisted living facilities say, here's the base price, but then we're going to add on your care costs. So if you need somebody every day to take you down to the dining room, you need somebody to remind you of to take a bath, to clean your apartment, those kind of things, that cost is added on. So that can go in assisted living up to about $6,500 to $7,000 a month. The skilled care is really the most expensive care that we have. And that's when you need 24-hour care, okay? Perhaps you need someone to help you out of bed, someone to help you, or you're in bed 24 hours a day. So you need 24-hour nursing care, and you lose much of your independence there. The skilled care facilities are going anywhere from $7,000 to, I'm seeing them up to $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 per month. Now remember that I'm also giving you the cost of one person. So if you have a husband and wife and they're both in skilled care, you're going to double that price for them. So you can very well spend $100,000, $150,000, even up to $200,000 per year for skilled care. So that is really expensive. The last one is sort of the memory care. And so we also have facilities that have not only skilled care, but they have memory units. And those memory units can vary. They can go from assisted living memory unit to skilled care memory unit. And we're seeing that those are going anywhere from $5,000 to about $9,000 or $10,000, $11,000 per month for memory care. And so again, you can spend $100,000 a year very easily on your care. So it's so important to know up front what level of care is mom and dad going to need, or what level of care am I going to need? I can start with assisted living, and then maybe I have to go into skilled care. So any questions about that so far? I like to let you know what the cost is, because I think people are very surprised at what the cost of care is going to be, and they've not planned on how they're going to care for that, how they're going to pay for that care. And until we can really figure out whether you're eligible for Medicaid or any benefits, we need to know what level of care that you're going to need. Now, one of the last things I want to just sort of touch on is, the famous last words of everyone is, I want to stay in my house as long as I can, and I don't want to go into a nursing home. But I think one of the things that we really need to consider now, especially more than we ever have in the past, is loneliness. And we're finding with the pandemic that loneliness has really created those extra kinds of issues. You know, loneliness causes stress, it causes high blood pressure. It affects our health in so many ways. So it's going to only expedite that process of needing further care. We also hate to admit that we're lonely, but it's been a hard time. That's one of the biggest issues that we've seen during this COVID pandemic, is that families can't visit, and our clients and our clients are just so lonely, and it's really affecting them emotionally and mentally. So when you're considering going or making a change, you know, a lot of people say, well, I'm just not going to go into a nursing home, but we're going to keep mom at home. Well, if mom is at home, she's at home all day long by herself, totally isolated. And so her physical problems are going to increase. It certainly has increased the onset of Alzheimer's and dealing with Alzheimer's. So don't shut those possibilities out because you just don't want to go into a nursing home. Think about those, you know, in a nursing facility, in a lot of these that I've talked about, they have activities, they have buses that go places. They'll take you to the doctors. You have someone to sit with you when you go to eat your meals. So socialization and isolation are so, so important in making these final decisions. I've just barely touched on that, but I want to turn it over to Laura. And Laura, you're from Westminster, and you might want to tell them exactly, you know, what your facility does. And also, you know, what is a CCRC? That's a good question, and that's many answers of many people ask that question.
Well, thank you, Carol. That was a great overview. And as you were going through your presentation, there were a million things that popped into my mind in terms of experiences that I've had with people making choices, families making choices in time of crisis, or coming and just being completely unaware of the cost of care, and now kind of being stuck. So I'm hopeful that this little presentation talking about a continuing care retirement community might stimulate some thinking from everybody who's on here. I'm here to talk about continuing care retirement communities in general. I'd be happy to talk to you individually about Westminster, but that is not my purpose. I would hope to be more educational here. So let's start with what is a continuing care retirement community. I'm going to be telling Maria to forward the slide, please. So kind of by definition, a continuing care retirement community, which we use the abbreviation CCRC, and some people call it a life plan community. But this is a community where people who are of a certain age, I'll call us seniors because I'm in this age 62 and older, and a continuing care retirement community. Oh no, can you?
We must have lost her for a second there. We'll just wait till she hops back on. Honestly, this might be a good chance to kind of throw out some questions if you have any from cost of care or the different levels of care for Carol, and we can kind of address those while we're waiting for Laura to hop back on here. And I know all of you are muted, so feel free, bottom left-hand corner, there's a little mic button that says unmute. If you click it, that should give you permission to speak, or there's a chat if you would rather just submit some questions into the chat as well.
So, Carol, can you just speak a little bit while we're waiting for if any other questions come about how you navigate conversations with family members that may have kind of a, or even your parents or yourself, they have an image of something as like an old folks home or something it's real negative. So how do you start the conversation to share that it's not necessarily like assisted living is not the same thing as skilled nursing, and they have trouble differentiating between the two?
Well, we're getting some feedback here. So, that's really a hard conversation, because many times I have clients come in my office and mom and dad think they're coming because they want to get a new will. And, the first thing they say is, I didn't want to come today because I know they want to put me in a nursing home. And a lot of times we talk about those options, that nursing facilities now are not what they used to be. And the best thing they could do was at least go and look at some of these facilities. They will be surprised what a difference they are. None of them are the same. And I always also say that the community that they're in should reflect their personality. There are some in this area that I don't want to go to because I don't want to dress up every night to go to dinner. And so I encourage families to say, we're not going to put them in a nursing home tomorrow. We're not even going to go there in 6 months, but let's at least look at some of our options so that if we experience a crisis, that we are prepared for that crisis and we know what you want. And our older clients and family members want to still be in control. So they want to go where they want to go. So we say, okay, we want you a part of this decision. So let's look at it now. Let's consider these options so that when the time comes, and if that time comes, we know what you want and where you want to be. It's a hard conversation, really hard conversation.
Carol, I'm back now.
Okay, we'll just have you go right ahead.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said there, and I apologize. For whatever reason, my computer just decided to shut down.
Okay.
Oh
I talked a little bit about how do you start the conversation.
boy, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
So as Carol had said, I'm going to go back to my slide here. CCRCs are really, it's a home for people who are over age 62. It is a community that offers care from when you live independently, and you might live in a house, you might live in an apartment, to when your needs change and you might need nursing care. That would be assisted living. And then, as she described, skilled nursing, what we used to call nursing home. I imagine everyone on here has a kind of a horrible memory of going to a nursing home when they were young. We've changed that name now. So next slide, please. So Carol kind of alluded to this, but what is the benefit of a continuing care retirement community? Well, the biggest one is that you're making the decision for yourself, and you're making decisions in a time where it is, you're making a decision for the rest of your life. So as you might consider a continuing care retirement community, and I loved that slide that Carol had, where you might think you need to think about your health, your finances, kind of what your future goals are. You were right, Carol, when you say that, so many people want to stay in their home. And it's always very interesting when that happens and we talk to people and they say, yeah, but I only live in my bedroom and my living room. So they're closing off rooms that are big. They're, whatever. So it's the right time to make this decision is when you're healthy. And you're right. Families don't have to make decisions in time of crisis. And I could give you story after story after story of families coming in and saying, I have no idea how much money mom has. I have no idea what mom's wishes are, but she's in the hospital. She just had a stroke and they're telling me she can't go home and live by herself. So, my children were home for Easter, and I had that conversation with them to say, guys, I want you to clearly hear me talk about what my wishes are. And I want you to know that this is not a scary thing for us to talk about. So what are other benefits of a continuing care retirement community? One, as Carol was talking about, loneliness. You're surrounded by other people who are your age. And many of us who have lived in our home for a long time, maybe our neighbors moved in at the same time, maybe we raised kids at the same time, or maybe we had a similar profession. But as people's health changes, of course, they start to move. And then you've got young people, or you've got, just a different scenario. In a continuing care retirement community, you would be surprised how many relationships, really strong relationships, are developed based on history, based on experience, based on maybe having similar hobbies and things. And so that is a huge, huge benefit of a continuing care retirement community. You also don't have home maintenance. So many of us feel dragged down by having to mow the grass or now pay for that to be done, or worrying about our roof or our appliances or whatever that might be. So in a continuing care retirement community, that worry is gone. You do not have to worry about that. You have some peace of mind to know that there are people who are going to take care of all of those issues for you. And then the other thing is that many of the continuing care retirement communities, and this is the most important point I'm going to make, offer contracts for homes and services for the rest of your life, even if you outlive your assets. So, yes, there's a cost involved with that. But many people say, I just don't know. What if I live a much longer life? What if I need some of those high cost care services that Carol has described? So many of the CCRC contracts do include care for life. May I have the next slide, please? I'm going to go through this again. Independent living, as we talked about, you live in a house or an apartment. It just so happens that everybody around you is of similar age, usually starting around 62. I would say that average of people moving into independent living, I'm seeing more in the 75 to 80 year range. Excuse me. Now, in independent living in a continuing care retirement community, you also have the option of having meals provided, housekeeping provided, activities, as Carol said, and things like that provided, utilities provided. But you also have the security of knowing that if you fall, if you don't feel well, you can press a button on a security pendant and a nurse will come and care for you. Assisted living. Yes, Carol described that. In assisted living, typically, people need assistance with medication and perhaps one or two of the activities of daily living. What does that include? Maybe showering. Maybe you don't feel as secure showering with not having somebody around, or maybe you need help getting to the toilet or getting dressed or grooming yourself. These are all activities of daily living, and these are services that are included in assisted living. The nurses will come, they will give you your medication as prescribed. I'm going to tell you that one of the biggest things that we see is people not taking their medications as prescribed. So sometimes getting people just on that good rotation of taking medications as prescribed, it improves their health. Skilled nursing, as I said, we used to call that nursing home. Now skilled nursing can be long-term care. It might also be rehabilitation. I've mentioned here short-term rehabilitation. In short-term rehabilitation, you may need therapy services. So you have more nurses around you who are able to assist you to get strong, to get back to the point where you may be able to go back and live in your home. Many times people, maybe have a hospital stay, and they find that the hospital comes in and they say, well, the good news is you're being discharged. The bad news is you can't go home. And you go, oh gosh, now what do I do? Well, you go to a short-term rehabilitation community where you will get your everything taken care of. You'll have therapy. Social services, it would be remiss if we did not talk about the stressors that all of these changes in our life create for us. The stress, and how stress can damage your health. In a CCRC, you will find social workers who are here to assist you through those things, to assist you and your family as you might experience health changes. And yes, memory care. Memory care is an expensive, dementia, Alzheimer's is an expensive disease. And many people need to be in a community that is secured for their own safety. But those people also need to have activities that are appropriate for what they can do, that activities and stimulation and things that are appropriate for that care. So those people would live in memory care where those are kind and loving communities. Next slide, please. A continuing care retirement community offers nursing care. Yep, we've talked about that. It offers social services. Now, social services is that social work, that kind of support that we've talked about. They offer activities. I got to tell you that one of the greatest things that I've seen happen with residents is maybe somebody was always interested in painting. And, they used to paint when they were younger, but they gave that up when they were raising children. I kind of always wanted to get back to that. Well, in a continuing care retirement community, what you're going to find are classes. You're going to find groups that have similar interests, maybe card groups, maybe it's lunch groups, maybe it's theater groups, maybe it's leaving the community and going out to museums, etc. But it's something that we can continue to participate in a very safe way. Some people, when they lose a spouse, suddenly find that it's difficult to attend activities, to go to the theater as they always used to enjoy, or go out to dinner. And here, as part of a group, you find that you are still able to participate in the things that you enjoy as part of a group in a safe way. Dining. Okay, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many of us that live at home have stopped cooking to the same degree that we used to? Why? Because it's not so easy to cook for one person, and even for two people, or maybe we're just tired of it. So what happens is we eat cereal for dinner, or grab a bagel for lunch, or something like that. And yet your nutrition is so important as it relates to your health. So providing dining services is really, really a key thing in terms of preserving your health. And most continuing care retirement communities have dining options included in the cost. Housekeeping, yeah, who wants to clean house anymore? So in a continuing care retirement community, that housekeeping is covered. Maybe it's each week, maybe it's every other week, but it is something that you no longer have to worry with. And maintenance, I kind of touched on this earlier, but in a continuing care retirement community, you don't have to mow the grass. You don't have to worry about the refrigerator that's leaking. You don't have to worry about, quite frankly, almost even changing your light bulbs. These are things that are all included in your cost in a continuing care retirement community. And then transportation. Boy, I was talking to some friends the other day, and many of us don't like to drive at night anymore, or don't like to drive in areas that we're unfamiliar with, or don't like to have to park way out in a parking lot when you're going to a doctor's office. And so transportation is also something that is a service that's offered by a continuing care retirement community. It kind of takes that whole burden of having to go out, clean off your car in the wintertime and then drive to an appointment. These are, or sometimes we've given up our car. And so this does still give you the ability to be out and vibrant in the community. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about different types of continuing care retirement communities, because here in Indianapolis, you will find that there are many. But I want to reiterate that a continuing care retirement community does include all of those levels of services: independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, and memory care. You're going to see that there are a lot of standalone assisted living communities. Well, that's not a continuing care retirement community. That's not what I'm referring to. And the reason that continuing care retirement communities really are as popular as they are is because if the last thing that I want to do is have to move when my health needs change. I mean, moving is hard enough, let's face it. So moving when my health needs change, that's not a good time. But as we talk about types of continuing care retirement communities, there is one that's called a type A. Okay, a type A means that you pay a certain amount of money when you go into that community. That investment that you make is also a promise that the community makes to you. And that promise is that they will care for you for your life. Some type A communities will offer assisted living and skilled nursing at the daily rate as of right now. So to some degree, you're prepaying those costs before you really need them. So it's holding it kind of at a steady rate. Usually skilled nursing is a little bit different, but you are controlling your costs. So one of the pros, you're controlling your costs earlier when you don't need that level of care. The negative is there can be very high buy-in fees. And in some cases, those buy-in fees are refunded to you, but it will depend on kind of how much of that care you've used along the way, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. There's also a type of community that's called a modified contract, okay? So again, you buy in, you pay a certain amount of money. That certain amount of money depends on where you move. For instance, if you live in a one-bedroom apartment, that might be less money than if you live in a 3-bedroom home. Makes sense, doesn't it? And then as you move through the continuum, you pay that money, but then there are still some monthly fees, but they are reduced because you are a life occupant, reduced in independent living and assisted living. So there's cost savings along the way. You don't pay in as much as you might with a type A contract. But there's the promise of care for life if you outlive your assets. I want to give you an example. And I will be upfront to say Westminster is a modified contract continuing care retirement community, so I am more familiar with this. But my example is a lady who lives in our community. She moved in when she was 70 years old. She knew what her assets were. She was in great health, and she looked at it and projected out and recognized that she could live here for 8 years covering her own expenses. But after that 8 years, her bank account, her investments, that was probably going to be depleted to the point where she might need some care. She might need some help. And so after that period of time, after 8 years in our community, she went and worked with our chief financial officer, and they figured out what her income was from Social Security now that she had exhausted a lot of her assets and those things that were paying her from her investments. So they looked at her Social Security and they said, okay, now what do your prescriptions cost? What does your insurance cost? What about gifts to your church and to your grandchildren? And they came down to a certain amount of money that she still had available that she could pay. And that amount of money was greatly reduced over what her original monthly fee was. And that is what she pays to this day. Now it's 3 years later. She lives in independent living. She has not needed to use the more expensive care, assisted living or skilled nursing, but our foundation is continuing to pay for her. She stayed where she was living and she was not moved to a bad place, I guess I would say. So that's kind of that benefit. Now, the negative about that is you do pay in, and that money that you pay in would amortize, or what I mean by that, the return to your heirs would be less as time goes by. And after a certain period of time, there may be no return to your heirs. It may be that is money that has been invested in the community. So that's a modified contract. Next slide, please. The last one is a fee for service. This is basically a rental. Typically, the monthly rental is much higher than what the monthly service fee that you would be paying if you had bought in on a type A or a modified contract. You still get those same services. However, you would not have the peace of mind that if you run out of money, you would have to make other plans. You have not invested in the community and you would have to make other plans. Now, this is a particularly attractive option for people who are saying, well, you know what, my daughter is going to move to Florida in 5 years and I may want to move there with her. So you haven't invested, you're paying a higher monthly fee, but you can easily move. You can easily change where you're living. The other thing is, instead of paying that money coming in, making that investment coming in, your funds are still fluid. They are still invested such that you are likely to continue to receive, a benefit of those investments. But again, as I said, it does tend to be the highest monthly cost, and you would need to relocate if you run out of money. May I have the next slide, please? As you look at continuing care retirement communities, there are many, many things to consider. And I'm going to just try and give you a little overview on this and try not to be so long-winded. I know I talk a lot and I'm sorry, I'm just pretty passionate about this. But, some things that you may want to consider is it a for-profit or a not-for-profit community? What does that mean? Well, a not-for-profit community is a community that will take any profits and reinvest right back into the community. A for-profit community might be, as the second bullet here talks about, a corporate-owned community. And that corporate-owned community might mean that you are needing to, the community will invest any profits up to the corporation. So there are some tax benefits for not-for-profit communities. There are some people who just really like the idea of working with not-for-profits. I've touched on the independent or corporate-owned community. There are some independent communities. I'm going to say Westminster is one. And there are also corporate-owned communities. Those corporate-owned communities, as I said, have got a headquarters somewhere else. What's the difference? Well, on a local basis, for me, as an independent community, my leadership is right here on our property, and I can go to my leadership, walk down the hallway and talk to her about somebody who's maybe interested in coming in here, or maybe a certain issue that I'm having, and decisions are made right here, instead of going up to a company that's, maybe out of state. Another thing that I really think people should look at is if the community is licensed. A licensed community means that we have to abide by certain state regulations as it relates to staffing, reporting, etc. We've all heard the horror stories of, well, there was no nurses around. Well, okay, a licensed community cannot do that. We are audited. We have people who come in, they look for the quality of our services. They look to make sure we have a safe environment and that we're charting our records and things like that. So I personally think people should always know to ask that question. The next one on my list is the financial stability of a community. Do not be afraid to ask the community to give you their financial disclosure. Recently in Indiana, there was a beautiful community that went through some financial hardship. Fortunately, the residents who had invested in that community were saved when another community purchased them. But you want to ask and know that if you are making an investment, you're making it with a strong business unit. So ask for their financial disclosure.
I have a question that was posed in the chat that they would like Carol to weigh in. How does asset protection work with a type A or modified contract situation? Yep.
There you go. No, you're muted, Carol.
So, okay, so, that's a very good question. And one of the biggest questions that I have is, and most of the time when we do ask for asset protection, you're probably not going to have enough money left to go into a CCRC or have the payment, may be able to make the payment to the CCRC that's going to be able to cover all your care costs. So I'm always asked, that's where your goals and your, what you're trying to accomplish is so important. Because if you want to preserve those assets for your children, you may not want to go into a CCRC because we don't know what your cost of care is going to be throughout your lifetime. So that's something that is very important to talk about with the attorney so that your goals and your objectives are completed. Does that answer that question? If not, ask me again and I'll try to answer that.
One thing that I don't have on this list, but I think is important to ask also is how, wherever you might go, would manage if you run out of money. Basically, do they accept Medicaid as a payment resource?
Yes, yes. And I think, if you've got $50,000 and you want to, you know, you're considering, what do I do? What kind of facility? You're probably going to want to go into an independent facility because you're not going to qualify for a CCRC. And there are qualifications to get in those CCRCs. They look at your financial situation.
Yes.
And so you're, you know, if it depends on your financial situation and what your goals are as to whether you should consider a CCRC.
Somebody asked, what about long-term care insurance?
Laura, can you answer that?
I'd be happy to. So long-term care insurance is a very wise investment. And normally long-term care insurance, you have to be receiving nursing care. So normally it kicks in assisted living. Now, what happens is most policies have either a cap on it where it's number of years, or they pay based on an amount per day or per month. Most CCRCs and what I have seen is that many of the long-term care insurance policies pay everything in assisted living for whatever period of time your policy is. I'm going to give you an example. There was a lady who lived here at Westminster. She lived in a cottage home until she was 97 and a half years old. And at 97 and a half years old, she decided she wanted to move into an apartment because she got meals. Well, at 99 and a half years old, she said, you know what, Laura, I have this long-term care insurance policy. It's equal to $500,000 in total assets. I've been paying on this for years. I think I want to move to assisted living so that I can tap in and use that investment that I've made along the way. We did an assessment. We moved her to assisted living. By the way, she's 100 and a half years old now, but her policy is completely paying all of the expense of her being in assisted living. What happens from a facility point of view is we are required to provide data to that insurance company on a monthly basis that says, here's what care this person has received. So there are qualifications. Normally, you have to need two levels, two activities of daily living, medication. Sometimes they'll allow meals and housekeeping to be considered one. Oftentimes it might be assistance with a shower and medication management.
And I think the bottom line is that long-term care insurance can be used in conjunction with at a CCRC. It can also be used when you're applying for Medicaid. So if you're in a facility that accepts Medicaid and your long-term care policy pays so much per day, Medicaid pays the rest. So Medicaid long-term care insurance can be used in conjunction with any of these facilities, basically, if you qualify to and meet the criteria for them to pay for your care.
I'm seeing the question. So if having a long-term care policy would mean that you pay less coming in? In our community, that is not the case, but it is considered a very valuable asset. And as Carol said, we do have to kind of look at the financial stability of a prospect. And so we look at that total amount and count that as an asset. So if you have $300,000 or $500,000 or whatever, we would look at that.
I had a question. Is there a certain age point that people should consider looking into, or is it a point that it's too late to look at long-term care insurance? What's the magic window?
Well, the older you get, the higher your premiums. Okay, so the ideal age, I think, is between 40 and 60. I think the cutoff a lot of times is 63 is when it really goes up high. But when we're 40 and 50 years old, we usually have children in college. We're trying to raise our kids. And so long-term care insurance is sort of like on the back burner. We don't really address that. And there comes a point where when you get to the age where your premiums are so high, it's probably not worth it. There are other products on the market now that you could look into that will pay for long-term care. And then if you don't use it for long-term care, it's like an insurance policy, it pays back to your family. So there are different products. That long-term care arena has changed over the last few years, and there are some companies that are not even offering long-term care insurance. So it's an unknown. It's really hard to be able to say, but usually when you get up to 70, 71, it's too old, it's too late.
And I'm also hearing people tell me that their premiums might be $10,000 a year,
Yeah.
and so it becomes kind of cost prohibitive. This is one thing I would suggest to you, though. If you have long-term care insurance, please make sure that your family knows what that policy is and where to access that. I face this frequently when people say, oh, she's got something, I just don't know what it is. And it really is, it's something that you can check into and understand your benefits just by making a call. And it's good to kind of have an idea of that.
And the problem has been that these older policies would pay $100 a day. That's what they would pay for care. And most of our care costs now are in facilities are up to over $200 a day for your care. So that's changed. So you need to know, what's your day, what will they pay daily, and what is your lifetime benefit? Okay.
I have seen quite a few people come in who said, I had this insurance, and a year or so ago, I got a letter saying that they were reducing my cap, reducing my total benefit. And I'm hearing that, maybe it was up to $500,000 and now it's reduced down to $300,000. But the daily amount that they're paying is higher.
Yeah.
I have one resident who recently moved in, and what the insurance company would cover was almost $12,000 a month. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Her policy was for so many years, they would cover up to a certain amount of money.
Any other questions? Was she finished with her? Laura, were you finished with your
Can you see if there's another slide?
Yeah.
Oh, next steps. I just wanted to say to people, if you are thinking about this as in your future, begin now to tour different communities. People always say that you really get a feel for the culture of the community when you walk into the community, or you see the people, or you tour. Some people, for instance, really prefer a formal dinner, and they like, kind of getting dressed up, where some people are saying, nope, that's not what I'm looking for in my retirement. So, go to the communities, tour, ask if you pass a resident, stop and talk to them. Ask them what made them select whatever community, ask them what they like, and also ask them what they don't like. I always tell our residents, be honest, because nothing is perfect, of course. And then, as I said, ask for a financial community or a financial disclosure, because that's important for your future. And then this is the last thing, we in this business tend to sell the home or the apartment. But let's face it, that's just a home or an apartment. That's not what is the most important part. The most important part is how you will live your life, because wherever you go, you should expect that you're going to see a beautiful home, a beautiful apartment, nice amenities and things like that. So that's why I say, talk to the people that are around you. Make sure you have a meal in the dining room to make sure that you like the cooking, etc. And then I think that might be my last slide.
Laura, I thank you very much for your contribution. I think my last comment would be, this is not an easy process. I preach that all the time. And it's very important for you to see an attorney, get a team of people that will help you make these very difficult decisions. And, you can't just take one piece of it. It fits together, the care, your goals, what you want to leave your family. It's all in, you can't just take it all apart and do one thing at a time. So that's why it's so important to have that team of people behind you to be able to help you make those decisions and make wise decisions and, consider all these aspects that we've sort of talked about today. So it's not easy. It's a difficult process, and it's really, sometimes it takes a little while to get it all working together and coming together. Any other questions?
I don't have, I'd just like to thank everybody. If anyone doesn't have a question, just to let everyone know, there was a question in this chat about it, will recording be sent? I have recorded it, and I'm trying to figure out how to get that out of my computer and to other people. So it's a really big file and I can't email it. So I have to figure out how to either do that somehow with YouTube or something. So that's a work in process. So I will try to figure that out. The second thing I wanted to just let everyone think about, it's a lot easier to make decisions when you're not in the middle of a crisis. So if you can avoid that situation, that would be probably the best move for families, to have non-crisis communications and discussions about these kinds of things versus wait until someone is in the hospital and then there's nowhere to go and you can't come home because you can't fit the wheelchair through the door and all those other good things. So it's always better to try to think about these things in advance if it's at all possible. So.
Yeah, and I was just going to say too, I know people have requested information from the first one, and there's information we can send from this one as well. I'm going to wait until the third one's over and just kind of send one email with all of the information that you can use. And then for our third presentation next Wednesday, same time, I believe, right, Barb?
Yes, yes.
It's on asset preservation for different periods of your life. It's actually going to be Lisa, our other attorney, speaking on that. And she's going to talk about things like, which we touched on the first presentation a little bit, but wills versus trusts, power of attorney versus guardianship, probate avoidance plans, asset protection plans, and crisis plans. So there will be a discussion around that. She gives some real life examples as well, just so you can kind of relate to them in your own situation. And yeah, so we hope that you join next week as well. And if you know younger couples that even want to join, because I think she'll be touching on even like right after you're married and starting to have kids, estate planning in that time of your life as well, you're welcome to extend the invitation.
All right, thank you, Carol and Maria and Laura, for offering all this information for people, and we hope to see everybody next week.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.